Okay, we are recording. I'm joined today by Saint Leonard. Hello.
Hello.
Nearly went for a sip of your coffee then, and
I did. Yes.
how are you? Okay.
Hmm. I'm very, very well. It's a gloriously sort of frosty but brilliant blue morning in New York. So I've got up quite early because I've got to go to the studio after this. But yeah,
Oh,
I'm very
wonderful,
well.
wonderful. So, where are you in New York? Where is this like a hotel? Because there's a very cool bit of art behind you.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm actually in my New York manager's gorgeous apartment in Red Hook, which is really one of the nicest apartments I've ever been in New York. She's a very lucky woman, and it's quite intriguing actually. The It's directly above the oldest Italian restaurant in the whole of New York, which is quite it's saying something really. And it's where Scorsese he's filmed several scenes from all of his
Oh,
various films,
really?
and he's often seen in just popping in to have lunch and dinner. There's photographs of him down there, and Caprio's often down there with him. So it's quite an interesting little haunt. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, fantastic.
yeah.
Well, we'll talk about locations and stuff during this chat as we kind of have a little sort of retrospective look back and then move forward and up to date with everything you're doing now. But we kick the chat off the same way each time. And I'm going to ask you to tell me, please, Kieran, the song that you regard as having the greatest ever intro, please.
Well, that would, for my money, be without doubt "Station to Station" by David Bowie, of course. I can viscerally, even talking about it right now, I can feel like the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I can remember where I was in a house actually, I was in Highgate when I was about 18 years old when I first heard that. And I mean, it sounds sort of melodramatic, but I remember like having found the record at my friend's house, liked the cover, getting very interested in Bowie and that sort of period of work. Got in, popped it on, and I just remember like hearing those there's rumblings and there's that Earl Slick guitar line, and it sounds like the subway. And actually, as I discovered really when I moved to Berlin myself, it sounds uncannily like the U-Bahn in Berlin, which of course I think was what it was being informed by initially, which it just has such a sense of foreboding and excitement, which is quite a hard thing to get at once. It has like a dramatic sort of like it feels like a curtain's being lifted. Well, I suppose it was because that was the introduction of the Thin White Duke to the world, and it sort of makes me feel elated but also scared, which I think that is what a lot of that album Station to Station does really. So yeah, in terms of like setting up a whole new, well, it was a whole new epoch in Bowie's career, but a whole new like moment in rock and roll, because it was like, I mean, it's strange to actually think that Station to Station was recorded actually in Los Angeles with Barry Manilow's producer of all people, which is quite strange because we think of it as being like preempting like the Berlin period and all that avant-gardism, but actually it was a pretty mainstream production by Bowie standards. And it's weird to think of them in sort of the center of like Hollywood or LA, making that really eerie,
Yeah.
otherworld, very European sounding music. So yeah.
And it wasn't necessarily like, what was your knowledge of Bowie before Station to Station? Because that's not necessarily the most accessible Bowie music. And so, where was you at that point when you discovered that?
I had been, I mean, Bowie had been like intrinsically important to me, both musically and sort of spiritually, since I was about 13. But I had all really, really, like most people do, I think, focused on the melodic. I mean, Hunky Dory was and Ziggy Stardust were actually, it was Ziggy Stardust I first got into via my mum when I was like 11 or 12. And then during my teenage years, out at parties with friends, you just always go for the easier, more accessible Hunky Dory stuff and the earlier ones. It was, but I knew there was so much more to Bowie. And then also, as you do know, you're kind of aware of all the other facets of his later career and the really strange places he occasionally went to. And of course, knew Let's Dance. But of course, weirdly, when I was at like 19, I didn't like Let's Dance much and I didn't like that stuff because it just seemed too flagrantly commercial. Now I actually really love that record and
Mm.
see it for the, again, sort of very forward thinking, visionary piece of music it was. Whereas for some reason I thought it was very commercial when I was like 19. But yeah, no, it was, I knew that I had to spend more time with this sort of the Berlin trilogy that I was aware of. I obviously knew about Low, knew about Heroes, and I knew about the character for Thin White Duke, but I hadn't as you said, it wasn't as accessible. And to be honest, no, like when I was growing up in Southend, my teenage years, there weren't many house parties where people were just like dropping on the B side of Low or putting on Station to Station. So it was after I moved to London that I started and was in a more arty scene that I started to find Station to Station, and that's when I discovered it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, this is a revelation. You grew up in Southend.
Well, I did I moved there when I was like 14, 15. So I had my formative teenage years there, which was incredible. Actually, an amazing place to be because my friends formed the band The Horrors. There was a couple of I was like quite involved in like the nascent guitar band revival that happened there. And it's like where I first saw the Libertines come and play the Chinneries, which then became a huge part of my own musical life, basically, and my own sort of career and
well, let's discuss this because I've run the Pink Toothbrush for 32 years.
Okay. Oh my god! Hang on. I had like the Pink Toothbrush was where I had like one of my first kisses with a girl. Like I went there on a Friday night. Good lord, I had no idea, Stu. Okay, well, yeah, I know the Pink Toothbrush very well.
Wonderful. I will be there again this Friday. It's been my baby for a long, long time.
I am very glad. Well, I assume then we may have even met before then, Stu. I might have been in the club with you, surely, because yeah.
But I'm imagining you're talking about Junk Club and the stuff.
I was, yeah.
That Ollie was doing down there with Reese and stuff. And
well, I don't want to get myself in trouble, but I certainly somehow was involved in the naming of Junk Club because I was hanging out with a girl called Vanessa and I was reading the Burroughs book Junkie, which she knew Reese, who was running the bagel bar in Leigh-on-Sea Broadway. And after finishing college, I went in and I was waiting for my friend Vanessa and I was reading Junkie. And then that somehow found its way into that scene. Now, I'm not claiming anything, but I definitely was aware that before long that had seeped in and become known. The Junk Club had appeared, and that was like that guy Ollie von Blitzkrieg as well. He kind of ran that.
Yeah, Oliver Abbott. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow, that was. Do you know what? And bizarrely, if you're aware of the Toothbrush, then we always thought we were this kind of we are still the longest running sort of alternative venue in the UK, but we kind of prided ourselves on that. And then I think around the time that I guess Junk Club opened in Southend, we'd fallen into the more mainstream of it was. I like to think it was the era of the K's. It was the Killers, the Kooks, the Kaisers of Leon.
It was exactly that.
And then all of a sudden there was just this little basement in Southend where everybody looked fucking wonderful. And they were playing, you was watching Ipso Facto, you was watching these New Puritans, and it was like,
yeah.
There's so much exciting. Neil's Children, there was all of this stuff that was like super exciting and just seemed very cool. And for about a few years, it made us feel a little bit old-fashioned and a little bit...
Oh, no, as a punter, because that was literally, I was 16, 17, 18 when that was first happening. We loved the Junk Club. I mean, I think I was at the first ever Junk Club via knowing Vanessa and the Horrors guys and Reese. But because we go to like the Pink Toothbrush, we'd go to the Chinneries for live gigs, which was always running the gauntlet, because it's actually quite dangerous getting to and from the Chinneries, because at that time Southend was pretty spiky at that end of the high street at night. In fact, I've run away from gangs of people away from Chinneries several times in my life, like run all the way back to Leigh-on-Sea Broadway on a couple of occasions.
Southend Seafront's a very hostile place, isn't it?
It certainly is, yeah. I mean, God, that's so funny. But no,
I might be wrong. I might be wrong, Kieran, but I think the Horrors may be playing Chinneries tomorrow.
That's bizarre. Wow, that'd be because Josh from the Horrors actually even played on a couple of my tracks, and actually my new album, he was playing guitar on that before, on the demo stage before I moved to Berlin to finish it off with the Fat White Family. Yeah, I think we've got one guitar line that we kept from Josh before, because I had started my new album at the Church Studios in Crouch End with Josh and a few other guys. And then the pandemic struck, and then I decided to move to Berlin. And of course, it was in Berlin that I met the Fat White Family, who then took over the band part of the record for me. So, but yeah, I'll have to text Josh and see what he's saying then, because they've got a new record, I think, the Horrors. So Yeah.
I believe so. I believe so. But
Yeah.
they're definitely playing Chinese very, very soon, if not
Mm.
tomorrow. Well, look, let's go back a bit further than that, and I'm going to ask you, Kieran, for track two, to tell me the first song you remember hearing that had an emotional impact on you, please.
These are great. I love these questions, Stu. I really enjoyed answering them. I had to really think about these. I think it was. I think it was. I mean, it's hard to say for sure, but I feel like it was A Day in the Life. Well, that's the one that I definitely can recall. Like when it came on, feeling kind of a complexity of emotion that no music had ever made me feel before, and I felt like this again, like not even realizing you could do that. That I didn't. I mean, that's probably about 8 or 9 when I heard this. I feel like it was around Christmas because I know my mum got me Sergeant Pepper's for Christmas, so it's probably like Boxing Day, Christmas Day, around there. And I remember listening to it. It was the first time I was really consciously listening to music with doing nothing else on my own because it was like the first time I'd owned my own piece of music. So it was like I had it on and I was in my room taking myself very seriously, listening to Sergeant Pepper's as you should
Is
do.
it a CD or a record?
It was a CD at that time because yeah, it was the age of CDs and that. But it was still a very magical object for me actually at that time, and I was like pouring over the liner notes still, even though it's just a CD case. But I remember thinking Day in the Life because obviously what a sonic world, and never heard two songs cut together in that way, and of course it does do that weird thing of like it's got this like plaintive, yearning, kind of soul searching, almost world weariness to what John's singing about in the first half. But then when that second section, which Paul lead, comes in, it's suddenly the excitement and joie de vivre that is the blend of that record suddenly lights up. But I just remember it had a very emotional impact. So I was like, wow, there's almost nothing you can't do with music. It's like there's no you can invent new worlds and new states. And I remember that. I remember having to like rewind it, click back and listen to it about 15 times in a row, and then like running downstairs to obviously tell people something they already knew, which was Day in the Life. What an amazing song. It's 2 songs at once. So yeah, I remember that very, very
This
vividly.
band called the Beatles. They're great.
Yeah, guys, I've just discovered this amazing new band.
I think they're going to be big.
Really visionary stuff, guys. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about home growing up and like where was it before you went to Southend and
Oh, I mean that's a bit of a long and complex and Byzantine story, but we moved around a lot. I mean, I lived a little bit in the UK, a little bit in Ireland, a little bit America, all over America, a bit in Florida. Following my mum around, just moved around quite a bit. I won't go into that too much, but sort of in a sense from Florida, I've had a couple of interesting years in Florida, Naples, Florida, which was quite a strange place, and then basically sort of crash landed in Southend-on-Sea at 15 without having had like been to like continuous schooling in that way, and then suddenly I was in like college there, and actually it was brilliant because I made my first proper group of friends there, and it was actually a magic from having had a very peripatetic upbringing and never really settling anywhere. Suddenly, like I had the sort of the colourful social life of Southend and the different colleges, and suddenly a music scene that I just threw myself into because I had loved obsessively music and been writing songs on my own with no one to play with for years. And then, I mean, it sounds hilarious, but like I moved to Southend, and then suddenly there were like places you could play music, loads of people playing music live, young people, and there was like a rehearsal room like in Southend that you could like rent for like I think it was £4 an hour or something ridiculous at the time, and you could put a band together. And then there were places you could just turn up and ask to get a gig, and they'd give you a gig on a certain night without knowing anything about. And then I even found a little venue that managed to convince. I can't remember what it's called now, but it's by the old Virgin Megastore in Southend. I went in there one day, saw that they had a stage, and said, "Can me and my friends from college come down here and play?" And they were like, "Yes, you can." They'd never done it before, and then that became we just like invented our own venue on Southend High Street. I feel like that again was fed into what happened with Junk Club, because I think once people started coming there, other people got the idea. Maybe Reese again got the idea that you could just go into those places in Southend and say, "Can we put a band on?" And
yeah.
that I do, and again, not taking take any credit or taking, any credit or claiming anything, but I think all that sort of do-it-yourself thing did come out of suddenly just people coming to these live shows and just saying, oh, you can do it here, you can do it there, playing upstairs at the Grand, all those sort of things you could do. And so it was amazing actually for Southend for me, because it was just so much live music opportunity that I'd never had anywhere else where I'd been. So and you could also, like, everybody would turn up. So like the colleges like Civic, Westcliff High School for Boys, the schools around there, like you'd put a poster up and then like you'd have like 150 people turn up for your first show, which was really weird. It was like there was such a demand for that. So yeah, it was great, Southend, in that department. Yeah, and it was just a very fun place to grow up as well. So yeah.
And to move there at 15, I'm interested to know, having such a sort of nomadic first 15 years, being here, there, and everywhere, did that help or hinder you socially in regards to making friends and putting yourself out there?
Well, really good question. I mean, it helped and hindered. I mean, I was very lucky. I was like an alien to most people when I arrived at my first day at college. I'd never really been in like formalized schooling, and certainly not in that environment. Certainly not in Southend. And I didn't know how to really talk or socialize with people. But I was very lucky. Like on my first day, I went into the like sixth form common room, and there was a lovely guy who was reading like Empire Film magazine, and I just had seen the film on the cover, so I struck up a conversation. He had a nice group of friends who were like tentatively all into film, and then I got into watching films there, and then I met a guy who was into films who was also really into music, and he was reading the NME magazine, which I always tell Mark Beaumont from NME this story because that was the first time I ever read a piece of Mark Beaumont. Now, like, Mark's reviewed my records, and I'm really good friends with Mark, and but like I remember him handing me going like, look at this guy, Mark Beaumont. He's just destroyed this band. I think it was like, I can't remember which band it was, like 747s or something. Like he'd written like, I couldn't believe this review. It was like the most scathing, like career-ending review. And then like I was like, what is this magazine? And then like the NME, like I was just buying. It was when you bought it once a week on a Wednesday for like £1.20 or something. And then so I met this guy Charlie, who was into the NME, and then I just started obsessively reading the NME. And then like from there, I think it was a matter of, I think I put my first band together from people who are all in that film group, and then met other people. But yeah, it was very different. I mean, Indigenous Southenders just thought I was an absolute weirdo and an alien, and like couldn't understand how I didn't know. And I had some otherness about me because of not having grown up in that part of the world and having lived in Florida. But actually, I made loads of friends, and then if they thought it was a bit weird, it wasn't like I suffered any bullying. It's just a bit of a bit strange about me, I think. And then, but no, and I was so excited to suddenly have a group of people I could be friends with and be able to do things. So yeah, no complaints there. But it was strange. It wasn't the most straightforward journey, but in the end, it was great. And once I started playing in bands, everyone was just getting on really well, and like it was such a vibrant scene. It was, yeah, I have such fond memories of that actually, and I know the Horrors do as well, because we do talk about that. It was so lively. It was incredible, actually. It's sad that there's not so much of that around anymore, because it's just too expensive for. There's no economy that will support that anymore, really, which is a shame. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm going to stay in the formative years for the next track, and I'm going to ask you to tell me the song that reminds you of your time at school, please, Kieran.
Oh, that was, I think it was Voodoo Child, the Slight Return version by Jimi Hendrix. And well, actually, that ties in perfectly with what I was just saying, because I think the first film that we all became obsessive with in this little group of pals was With Nail and I. And we absolutely, as you would do when you're like 16, that scene when Richard E. Grant, when they fall asleep driving back to London, and he wakes up and Richard E. Grant's driving the Jag down the M1, drinking brandy. And it's just, I mean, it's iconic moment. And when you're 16, it's the coolest thing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And for some reason, like, I swear that song never sounds better than when it's on that bit of that film. It's like, it just sonically, it's just the way it's treated or something, it just sounds amazing. And then I think, like, basically, just as you do when you're a teenager, I think I almost like insisted that whenever I walked into the sixth form common room at like break time, I always put that song on the CD player, because it was like my entrance music from that point on. It just, I mean, ridiculous cringe stuff, but it just became totemic of like an aspiration to be that, I guess with Nail was a kind of punk to it. It just seemed like a really punk way of being. Then it kind of is, and it was like so erudite and literary and naughty and fuck off to everything that we just love. It just spoke in my group of friends. It spoke our language. So yeah, that song, and we just used to play it all the time, and like used to listen to it walking to school and stuff. So yeah, that was that for me. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the Daniel Day-Lewis film In the Name of the Father?
I have. I love that film. Yeah, yeah.
That's the intro to that as well. That opening
Oh, oh,
scene before the riot kicks is
oh
that. And
yes,
it's
yeah.
wonderful. When you said opening scene of film, in film, I thought, oh, he's going to talk about In the Name of the Father because that's such a.
I've actually forgotten that. I have to revisit that. But yeah, I love that film. It's a very beautiful film. But yeah, no, it was
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So, in your time at school, I mean, two questions around that. Did you enjoy it? And did you know what you wanted to be?
Oh, good question, Stu. Yeah, I did actually enjoy it because the college I was at had some brilliant teachers who they knew that they understood that I was coming from not much continuous education at that point, and were very keen to let me pursue creative. I was like, for example, I wanted to make a film. They let me take loads of time off college to make this mad, harebrained horror film that ended up taking a year and a half. And then, incredibly, kind of built a kind of cinema or a viewing room to show that film for us, which was incredibly supportive for me and my friends. Like they found the funds to do that. Then I declared I wanted to do like a massive production of a play at school, and they then agreed to let me do that. So I did a big production of a Shakespeare play, and we're all for it. And then I started like writing, taking a lot of time off other lessons to just pursue writing and put on gigs and stuff. And it sort of seemed they just thought, well, as long as, given that I was like doing English A level, philosophy, and history, because I was kind of pursuing the creative arts, they just didn't seem to. I'd often arrive quite late for school or just vanish from lessons to be pursuing, like to be rehearsing with my band or something. They didn't. I mean, they weren't like completely laissez-faire, but they definitely could see that I was passionate about and doing things. It wasn't like I was just bunking off. I was actually doing other activities. So no, it was. I have to, and again, like without being too halcyon about it, they were incredibly supportive, the teachers, and understanding and uh, encouraging of all of these harebrained schemes and enterprises. Even let me perform with my band at the end of year assembly and things like that. Just yeah, so overall can't complain about that. So very, very kind of supportive. It was. So what was the other second part of your question, Stu? What was the second
Do you know
part?
what you wanted to be?
Oh yeah. Oh, I mean, it sounds a bit. I was very interested in acting because I was doing these films and plays, and of course, I did end up then going to drama school for directly after college. But really, when I put my first band together, the Drugstore Romeos, and played the Chinneries the first time. I think within about 30 seconds of being on the Chinneries stage, I was like, "And this is what I shall be doing for the rest of my life." I think, but.
Oh, wonderful.
But the thing was, the reason I didn't just pursue, and it was funny because then the horrors formed, and everyone was doing pretty well, and everyone was like, "Oh, you're going to go up to London and do some shows." But oddly, I felt I really had to I'd been really fixated on acting by that point for like 3 or 4 years, and my mum was very encouraging of me pursuing the actual craft. She wanted me to be trained as an actor, so then I thought, oh, I'll apply for drama school and then see what happens, and then. I did actually get into drama school, so uh, I just pursued that. It took me to London, and I thought I'll follow that for a little bit of time. And so the music for a little while took a back seat because I was studying to be an actor and doing plays and bits of TV and stuff. So, but yeah, so I did know. Yeah, to answer your question, I did definitely know from the first show I played that I wanted to be a musician for the rest of my life. Yes.
Love that. Love that. I'm going to ask you now for your fourth track. And if you can tell me, please, Kieran, what was the first record you remember buying from a record shop?
Yes, my fourth track is Dead Leaves on the Dirty Ground, which is on the White Blood Cells, White Stripes record. And I bought that in Virgin Megastore in Southend because I'd been round to a friend's house and he'd found, I don't know how he'd found the White Stripes. It was giving me his credit. A guy called John. He had found them very early, like really. They were still in Detroit at this point, and he'd signed up and become a member of Jack White's mailing club, where it's still like you had to send into like a PO box, like a postal check.
Yeah.
And he was going, "You won't believe this, Kieran. It's like a brother and sister," because that's what everyone thought at the time. The brother and sister. There's just two of them. He plays guitar. He plays, and he put on. He had like a not even a properly released. It wasn't like on. It wasn't like on label. It was like on Jack's own. You had to mail in for it. Put on. It wasn't the full version of the White Blood Cells record. I can't remember what it was. It was like some EP version, and my hair blew back, my ears were flapping in the wind listening to that, and I was like, so as soon as I could find it, I went down into Virgin Megastore and I spotted it and I bought it and didn't listen to anything else for about, without exaggeration, at that time, because I'm sure you can remember, Stu, like we had been in an absolute tundric wasteland of like Backstreet Boys, Spice Girls. There was no guitar for that from like 1998 to like 2001. There wasn't any guitar. It was strange.
Well, I think all the guitar stuff that was happening then was quite safe. It was the time of Travis,
yeah,
Boom
absolutely.
Breaks, and early Coldplay, and it was all quite acoustic and quite Radio 2 and safe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it did completely. It didn't feel like, if you can see the evolution of this, can't you? Like it didn't feel like Voodoo Child, Jimi Hendrix. It didn't feel like Station.
Your mum and dad would have liked any of them
Yeah,
bands.
exactly. Yeah, and it also like you really didn't. I can remember this because I just couldn't relate to Travis or Coldplay. I didn't know what they were singing about or what kind of what they represented really wasn't clear to. I actually don't mind Travis and Coldplay weirdly, or like I've met Fran a bunch of times. I actually really respect Fran as a songwriter now, but I mean I don't want to be talking. I think there's some good things about Travis now, but at the time, as a young teenager, I just didn't understand it. And whereas the sound of the White Stripes was like, now that sounds like that spoke to me and and my friend John. Then we went up to it's so funny because I ended up having the same agent as Jack White, Russell Warby, and I've realized once I've worked with him that I went up to one of the first White Stripes show at the Boston Megadome, Boston Globe thing in Kentish Town. It's like when their first time the White Stripes came over to the UK. I was 16, and it was a big journey for me. And I had to like get my mum's permission to get the train up from like Leigh-on-Sea up to Kentish Town. It was like an adult mission to go and quite daunting in a way. I had my friend with me, bought our tins and did the thing, and I'm very happy I saw that because that was like still one of the best live shows I've ever seen. And it's so funny because Russell Warby booked that show, and then he, 8 years later was my booking agent. So it's just funny you're in the room, a bit like meeting you, Stu, and you're probably in the pink toothbrush with me 20 years ago. So,
More than likely, more than likely. Okay, well, look, we've touched on Drunk Club, and we've just mentioned that my beloved pink toothbrush. Let's talk clubbing. Tell me the track that soundtracked your year's clubbing, please.
let me just have a look what I said on which track was it? Oh yeah. Now I've never really been truly a clubber, but I do love Ibiza, and I do go to Ibiza to stay at actually Russell's house, the agent's house out there. But and I when I say clubbing, I think of going to like house parties that were really going off, and then back to my own house afterwards with loads of friends. And for me, the Kanye West track "Power" is sort of my go-to when I'm in the mood to rage. That's the one that I still do. I mean, quite often when I come off stage, even to this day, me and the Fat White Lads will often be discovered imbibing a couple of drinks and listening to some Kanye very loud indeed, because nothing quite hits the spot like Kanye when you really need to get your club on. So yeah, that's that. Yeah, but I was never really truly one for the club like the actual club scene. But although actually in my 30s, I'm getting more. I mean, obviously, once I moved to Berlin, actually that's not true at all, because once I moved, when I was in Berlin, I basically spent a year in the clubs, but that was very different. That was like, when you say clubbing in Berlin, that's a state of mind. It's a lifestyle, really, and you're listening to like extremely unusual, sometimes quite painful techno for hours on end. So yeah.
Okay. let's go home after that club. I'm going to ask you for the next track, which is the song that reminds the song from an artist from your home county.
Now, I couldn't. Now, I've chosen. Hang on, let me just look at my list. I've chosen "Death on the Stairs" by the Libertines. Now, they're not from Carl will go mad because Carl is quite, proudly from Basingstoke, as he should be. I'm not sure where Pete's from, but I chose it as from my home county because I first met. Bearing in mind, I'm godfather to Carl's firstborn son, and he's one of my bestest friends, and I'm touring with the Libertines in February for like the fifth time in my life. So Carl and the Libertines have become a huge part of my life. But I very first met him on one of his first proper shows, which was at the Chinneries just before Up the Bracket came out, when I think the Enemy had just done one little feature on them. And I remember my first girlfriend, who I kissed in the pink toothbrush, you'll be glad to know. I kissed her in the pink toothbrush, and then the next few days later after that, she told me that there was this amazing band of poets called the Libertines who wrote their lyrics on their jeans. She was telling me all this mad mythology about them that she'd extracted from the NME. God bless the glory days of the NME, probably from a piece written by Mark Beaumont. She was like, "Oh, this band from London, and they're like cooler than they're like the Strokes, but they're better than the Strokes because they're English and they're actual poets, and they write all their lyrics are on their jeans, and they're playing the Chinneries on Saturday." So I was like, and they're called I remember her saying the Libertines, and thinking, that's probably the coolest band name I've ever heard. So
It's a
maybe I should.
fucking great name for a band, that.
It really is. I mean, the number of times I've had to, drunkenly congratulate Carl. I do it all the time. Like, he won the prize on that one. That is like the best band name ever. So anyway, went to the Chinneries. It was packed because that was the power of the NME back in those days.
I was there.
You were there as well, yeah. And I remember having my, oh boy, like that was when the rocket rock and roll crash landed, or the V2 bomb crash landed again in London, because it felt like something like the swinging 60s had kicked off again with that. And because I'd played the Chinneries quite a bit with my own little high school band, I managed to, after the show, knew exactly, or the guy who ran it knew me, so I managed to worm my way back to where Carl and Pete were outside on the street having a cigarette. And I was like, I was speaking to Carl. He doesn't remember this, but why would he? Because obviously I was just some weird kid. But I do remember it, like, and sort of wanting to look at his jeans and see the lyrics written in his jeans. That's such a big deal to me. And spoke to him. And then basically I was like, wow, you can. And I just, from that was like the Libertines told an entire generation that you could re-mythologize your musical world, or you could just be what you could be. It sounds really cheesy, but you could be the thing, you could become the thing you wanted to be, and you could take from all your passions. And they made literature cool and made Englishness cool. Because if you've got to remember, at that time, the Strokes and the White Stripes were totally ruling the world, and it was America that was. Oh, sorry, someone's a bit livid on the streets of Red Hook in New York. But it was the American guitar bands that were ruling, and then suddenly it's like Carl and Pete came along and pushed them to one side and said, "No, English is cool again." Different though, from not like Cool Britannia with Oasis. This was different. This was more like they were referencing First World War poets and wearing those military jackets. And
it felt more like a not like Blur, Oasis, or any of that. It felt to me that was a natural kind of follow on to the Smiths for me. It was it felt way more English like that. It felt a bit Mike Lee. It felt very very poetic, obviously, and chaotic.
Yes. Still is.
Yeah.
Even to this very day, it's chaotic. I did some amazing shows in February last year with them. I played A Dream Come True. I played the Cavern Club with them in Liverpool, and then we played another tiny little venue. It was like they deliberately did a tour of tiny venues that I opened the shows for, and the chaos it's still there was a point where I was playing the Cavern Club, and I turned around and both Pete's dogs had come on stage with me, and I was singing a really heartfelt sort of piano ballad, and then just two massive Alsatians either side of me, and Pete by the side of the stage with a bit of cheese trying to coax the dogs back off stage. I was like, some things never change.
Wonderful. Yeah. I am. I'm good friends with Gary, and
I know Gary,
and Gary and I run club nights together for a long time in East London, and one of the things he always used to sort of talk about was kind of how ahead of the game Pete was with like using internet cafes and forums and
Oh
like
yeah,
building that interest where like he was, like pre-social media, he
yeah.
was making himself accessible to fans and building, utilizing the technology that was about then so well, organizing like after parties and squat gigs and stuff. And I just thought that doesn't get talked about enough. I thought that was really interesting how you build that.
Absolutely. The genius was, I was telling my manager in New York about this just last night, funnily enough, the genius of doing those house gigs because they were like, don't need to be booked at whatever the forum or wherever, like the Barfly. We'll just do it in our mate's gaff.
Yeah.
And after that first show that I saw in the Chinneries, me and my girlfriend at the time, Holly, were like, "Oh my gosh, you've got to see them again." But you couldn't find out. You had to. She then found one of those forums, like Libertines, whatever it was, Yahoo.com, and then she'd watch it obsessively, and there'd be rumors, and then Pete would just pop up and say, "Oh, whatever, like Seven Sisters Road, 9:30, bring a bottle, £4 on the door," and then we went up, and it was absolutely just a council flat with unfortunately about 500 people trying to get into it. And
That's literally just like them illegal raves.
yeah,
When I was a kid, and
yeah.
you'd get that, you'd have to get that message to go here, then phone that number, and that's when you'd find out where the rave was. Like, and you felt so involved, and you felt so special if you got
Oh,
that
yeah.
call.
It was truly underground and truly subculture, and that is something that I haven't. I mean, maybe there is some of that. I wouldn't know now, but I'm sure there is bits of that bubbling away. But my God, was that exciting, and just how like word of mouth and mad rumors and like or just never knowing what was true, or like the number of times we turned up at places where the Libertines definitely weren't playing that night as
Yeah,
well. I've got just on.
I
So
love
go
that.
on.
It's absolutely like, especially as young kids finding your tribe and you find your first band that you really, really give a fuck about, and there's
Oh
all
yeah.
of that magic around it. It's so exciting.
Oh yeah, and it still hasn't worn off because although obviously, I mean, I've lived with Carl. I mean, I'm as close with Carl as it's. I mean, we even live near each other now, and I live in Ramsgate. He lives in Margate. We see each other a couple of times a week, but still, sometimes the magic of when I first. I mean, it sounds very misty-eyed and romantic here, but like the magic that him and Peter sort of imbued has not worn off for me. I still see it. He'll do something now, even all these years later, or he'll mention something. They still have that enchanted Englishness that I still think is glorious, actually. So I have so much respect to those guys. One thing, just since you are friends with Gary, I've lots of funny and amazing Gary memories, but I have a great one of Gary, which is my first ever professional show. So I played like two proper little gigs, one at Boogaloo in Highgate, and Carl came along, and a friend had mentioned it to him. Carl came along, he watched me play, then invited me back to his house in Muswell Hill, and then went, as he would do in Carlos magic way, went, "Oh well, I suppose I should probably come on tour then, shouldn't you? Should probably start. We go on tour in like 2 days' time, so you're coming with us all around Blighty, then on to Europe." And I was like, "Oh my God, on tour with the Libertines? What? I can't believe it!" Panic station. So like, left his house next morning, ran home to my flat in Crouch End, and I told my girlfriend, I was like, "I'm off on tour with the Libertines." Packed up my guitar, just opening acoustically for them, and then Carl just texted me and said, "Oh, the tour bus will be leaving grab the tour bus from, it'll be outside the Boogaloo at 5 o'clock on Friday. First show is in Glasgow on Saturday at the ABC." So I just hopped up to the Boogaloo on Friday. There was the tour bus outside. Never been on a tour bus in my life. Climbed aboard. Carl and Pete were doing some press or something. They were already up in Glasgow. The only person on the tour bus was Gary, who I'd never met. And he was like, "All right, Cap, how are you?" And I'm like, "Hi, Gary." And I was just like, me. And I was like, Carl's invited me. He's like, Gary's like, "Yeah, I think Carl mentioned that. I think he did say there was something." And he was like, "Well, sit down." And then just
That's a
me
very
and
good
Gary.
impression, by the way, Kieran.
He was like, "Sit down." It was just me and Gary on it for my first time ever on a rock and roll tour bus. Me and Gary on a tour bus that left the Boogaloo and just drove through the night up to Glasgow with just
Real.
getting to know Gary. Gary like pouring me some Jack. It was a time when Gary would love his Jack Daniels, just drinking Jack Daniels. And then the next day, like we went to sleep in the bunk, like in the bus, then woke up. Gary got me up and said, "Oh, should we get some breakfast in Glasgow?" And then I was just walking around. So my first professional day as a musician, and he was like kind of encouraging me, giving me sort of tips for the night show. But I have such a golden memory of Gary being so kind, so gentle, so thoughtful. Because of course, once I got to the venue, then Carl and Pete were immediately like, "Oh my God, this is going to be very hard for you, Kieran. Like, oh, you know, you'll be lucky to make it through your first song without a pint of piss being thrown in your face. You know what these Glaswegians are like." But then I had lovely, supportive Gary all the way up the motorway and all morning going, "You'll be fine, Cap. You'll be good." And then of course, Carl and Pete were like winding me up to the point where I was like expecting to just be bottled off stage by the time I walked on. But as it went, it was all fine. But just a lovely memory of Gary there, actually.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. All right, Kieran, it's your last track, and this is your opportunity to turn the listeners of the podcast onto something new. And this is a track that you think many of the listeners may not know that you would like them to hear.
Yes, it's Amsterdam, but the Scott Walker version, which is confusing because it's not confusing. The reason I want them to hear it is because this song is like has a magic lineage, in my opinion, because originally it's a Jacques Brel song. So Jacques Brel sang it, and then of course I love Jacques Brel. If you don't know who Jacques Brel is, one of the all-time great, truly great. I suppose we would call him I was going to say chanteuse, but really he's like a crooner, but he's more than a crooner. He's just like an amazing singing man. But he's a man who sings, basically. And then, of course, Scott Walker then did Scott Walker Sings Jacques Brel as an album, which is a whole life-changing record. And for me, this is one of the great songs, great renditions, great readings of that song. But I weirdly first found the Scott Walker version through David Bowie's cover of Scott Walker's version of Amsterdam, because Bowie, when he was early on in his career, did his own version, which is equally bizarre and mad. So really, if you like the Scott Walker version, you can go back in time to its origin, which is the Jacques Brel, and forward in time to David Bowie. And that's like a golden chain of singers. And one of the weirdest songs, there is no song that I know of that is quite like Amsterdam. It's like a yarn. It's kind of like, it's really depressing, but makes you really excited. It's really nothing quite like it. And also it's one that you kind of always have to listen to about 3 times in a row. You can't just listen to it once. You have to just go, "Let's hear that again. But yeah, and Scott Walker's rendition is amazing. And often I think with Scott Walker, I'm always trying to turn people on to him. And you just have to find that one track that you get with him, because it is obviously extremely angular, extremely unusual music, particularly the later albums, and can be very daunting or just too much for people to get to crack. But if you find that one song, then it's a gateway into the rest of it. But yeah, so yeah, Amsterdam by Scott Walker is my tune.
Absolutely. But I mean, to go full circle back to Station, and I think with Scott Walker, growing up listening to the Walker Brothers was that soft launch into the chaos that followed. It was like, "Oh, this is beautiful. This is," and then it does get quite awkward. And
does indeed, yes.
But
tilt.
But yeah,
the tilt record gets quite difficult.
Well, we make it nice and easy for people to go and explore that track and all the other tracks that we've spoken about today. Kids, we put together a little Spotify playlist to accompany the podcast so people can go and reference all the songs that we've spoken about today. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about other people's music and we've not banged on about yours yet. So I think it's important that we talk about you and what you're up to. So what's happening?
Well, I have just almost as of yesterday put out a new single with Brian, co-written with Brian Eno, which is a absolute wildest dream come true, and I'm extremely proud of it. It's called The Red Book. It's the first single from my forthcoming album, which I made in Berlin with the Fat White Family, and I'm very, very pleased with myself. I moved to Berlin to sort of soak up all that Bowie krautrock influence, and ended up completing my album with a track co-written with Brian Eno. So I mean, I couldn't really have hit the nail more on the head with that. So I'm very, very chuffed with myself about that. So
we can't just move past that, and because like how did that come about? And for somebody that, like you say, went to Berlin to soak up that, and a lifelong fan of Bowie, and to end up working with Brian Eno. I mean, just tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, yeah, I can't say too much. In fact, I must remain enigmatic for contractual reasons. But basically what happened was a friend of a friend had heard my Berlin record, and it had been reviewed. One of the tracks we'd previewed, had a great review in the Times. They picked it out as an essential track, and it said has a bit of Bowie's Berlin era to it, stylish and rather unusual. That helped basically get Brian's attention. Someone gave him an early copy of my record. He listened to it. Then I invited him down I was playing a show at Third Man Records, to go full circle about White Stripes. I was playing at Third Man Records in just an amazing venue, Jack White's venue in Soho, and invited him down to that. And then nothing, I didn't hear anything. And then a mutual friend said, "Oh, there are some tracks that have been worked on that date quite a long way back that nothing's ever happened with. Spoken to Brian, maybe you would like to have a pop at putting a vocal on one of them." So I just thought, this is insane, and obviously this is not real. And I remember reading the email about 12 times, then going downstairs, having to thinking I might actually have just gone over the edge from being too into Bowie in Berlin. I had to get my girlfriend to come up and saying, "Can you read this email back?" And she's like,
I'm
"No,
hallucinating Bowieisms now.
yeah, exactly, hallucinating Bowie." And then she's like, "No, it's saying that." And there's an attachment of a track. So I opened this 8-minute piece of music, which was a piece of unheard Eno music, and I just sat and I knew. To be honest with you, I just thought, "Good Lord, I cannot believe this is happening." But I have to do the best thing I've ever done in my entire life. There is no possible. I mean, send you a piece of unfinished, unreleased track. It's like someone giving you a Picasso saying, "Oh, would you mind finishing this off for me?" It's like, what do you do? So I just, I quite seriously spent I locked myself away in my music study at home for about 4 or 5 days. My girlfriend was very understanding. I listened to it over and over again. I meditated. I took it very seriously. I was going for long walks, really soul searching. I was thinking and thinking and thinking, and then eventually some ideas began to coalesce. Some pretty abstract, lofty. I really wanted to bring something important to the table to really make a statement thing. So I've worked and worked and pulled everything I could out of myself, and I dug into some Carl Jung, some psychoanalytic stuff, and then put together some ideas. And then the studio date came round. I went in, could not really believing what was going to happen, and then went in for a take. And it's a 7-minute piece of music. It's a continuous piece of singing. I did one pass, thinking, well, we'll see. And then they were just like, "No, that's really good. Just maybe do a double track." And I did it again. And then they were like, "That's all we need. Thank you." I was like, "Oh, okay. Is that all?" No, that's it. That's fine. So then I left thinking, wow, I don't know what's going to happen here. I need to, what's going to happen next? Is this okay? Didn't hear anything from the Eno camp for a month. And then I thought, oh my God, my music's killed Eno. He just can't deal with it. He's gone not good, never going to reply. Turned out he's on digital sabbatical or something. And then about a month later, I just got an email from the other co-conspirator on the track, Lol, saying he was, just got this message through from Eno's management, and they're saying, "No, yeah, proceed. We absolutely love it. You should put it out." So then next thing I knew, we had this track, and it's going to be on my album, and we just released it on gorgeous 12-inch blood red vinyl. If anyone wants to get a copy, they're probably already pretty much sold out because it went on sale yesterday, and I think most of the stock went in one day because it's a new piece of Eno music, and I must say it's pretty unusual. So yeah, very proud of it. So yeah.
Fantastic. And in regards to playing live, what's coming up?
Well, my album, I've got basically in January, the end of January, I've got another single out to announce the album. The album's then out in April. In February, I'm doing some dates with the Libertines all over Europe. So the one I recommend, if anyone does fancy that, we're playing Berlin and then Munich. I think the Berlin show is going to be very, very special for various reasons. I'll say no more about that. So that's my computer running out of battery. Then as soon as the album's out in April, I'll be touring the UK and doing a London show, and then festivals and the usual cycle after that. But yeah.
If people want to keep up to speed with releases, dates, and everything, where's the best place to follow you, mate?
Oh, I think Instagram for me is usually a good one, and that's at the Saint, the word Saint Leonard. So the Saint Leonard is where they can find me on Instagram. I'm also on Twitter, but yeah, everything's posted on there. But yeah.
And if it's all right with you, Kieran, when this comes out, we'll tag you in it. So if people aren't following you already, we make it nice and easy for them to do that.
Of course. Lovely.
Been,
Thank you.
it's been an absolute delight chatting to you today.
Likewise, it's really some mutual friends in common,
I
and
know.
some historic places in common as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Best of luck with the record. Best of luck with the tour. I'm going to press stop on this recording, but don't go anywhere.
Okay. Thank you, Stu. Thank you very much.